From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Most people around the world want to see a ceasefire in Gaza. Another temporary one at the very least. Something to alleviate the suffering of hostages and to help the Gazans who have been killed, injured and not given enough aid. So what's been holding things up? We've had arguments about how the aid is distributed in Gaza, whether the ceasefire could be permanent. We've even had Benjamin Netanyahu back in the US to flatter Donald Trump. And one Israeli minister suggesting corralling Palestinians into one so-called humanitarian city, to much upset. So, the story today. What does it take to end the war in Gaza?
My name's Gabrielle Weiniger. I'm based in Tel Aviv. I've been covering the war in Gaza, Lebanon, Iran for the last nearly 2 years now.
Binyamin Netanyahu has been back in Washington, D.C. this week, the third time, I think it is, in this second Trump administration, which is quite a feat. Not many world leaders do that. But also they have a very interesting relationship, the two of them. Would you not agree?
Interesting is one way of putting it. I think that is a bit of a victory, actually, for Benjamin Netanyahu. Going 3 times in 6 months, I think must be a record for any foreign leader, definitely for an Israeli leader.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's an honor to have Bibi and Sarah with us, friends of mine for a long time, and we had a tremendous success together. And I think it will only go on to be even greater success in the future.
And I think part of the meeting was, in a way, to do some kind of a victory lap, I suppose, about what is their perceived success in the Iran war.
We had a great result recently, and we're going to have a lot of great results. So it's great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Benjamin Netanyahu had to bring something to the table. And I think there were many onlookers hoping that he would bring a ceasefire deal.
I want to express the appreciation and admiration, not only of all Israelis, but of the Jewish people.
But that didn't happen.
I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
What he did bring was a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, which, coming off the tails of a very violent and deadly war, a 12-day war with Iran, was quite, critics said, was quite ironic.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I wouldn't call it a friendship. I think they've had a very tumultuous relationship. Trump has actually scolded Netanyahu in public before. One particular point comes to mind when Trump announced the ceasefire between Iran and Israel had its warplanes on the way to bomb Tehran after the ceasefire had been announced. And Donald Trump called to bring them back and to stop their silliness, basically, and called out a world leader in that way, in a very angry way.
He used fruitier language than that.
He did. I just didn't want to say it live on air.
No, good, quite right.
So, yeah, they have had an interesting relationship, to say the least.
Donald Trump has been saying for weeks now, we are close, there is a deal in the offing, and it is a US sort of brokered deal that's on the table at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. I'd actually go as far as to say that it's not just a US brokered deal, it's a US written with Israeli support deal. Hamas haven't written this. This isn't a joint penned agreement between the Palestinian militant group and Israel. This is something that is based on the Witkoff proposal, who is the Middle East envoy for the current administration. It's his proposal. This is the proposal that's been floated and even been used in the previous ceasefire from January until February. And the formula is kind of the same. So the release of hostages in stages, the freeing of a large number of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails, as well as Gazan detainees who have been held without charge. There'd be a 60-day cessation of hostilities, a withdrawal of Israeli troops to a certain agreed-upon line, which is a sticking point at the moment, as well as what Hamas are demanding now, which is the removal of the Gazan humanitarian fund, which has been seen as basically a failure, not only widely condemned by the international community for overseeing the deaths of dozens of Palestinians every day on their search for food, but also by Israeli officials who are saying that Israel hasn't managed this well and aid isn't being properly distributed. Israel's also insisted that Hamas not hold those ceremonies, that if you remember seeing them back in February, the hostage release ceremonies, which Israelis found highly offensive, disturbing, and upsetting.
So if this is a US-written proposal with some kind of Israeli support, can we infer from that the holdup is on the Hamas side?
Yes, I think that would be correct. Israel's agreed to this proposal because they're the ones that have put it on the table. And we understand it that the sources are telling me that the internal leadership in Gaza actually really need this deal. They're saying we need to recoup. We've got no finances. Our people are hungry, not only hungry for food, but also for a ceasefire. And now it's up to the negotiators, who are the ones holding the indirect talks in Doha, in the Qatari capital, to get those things done on some terms that they can accept.
So what is the big sticking point, would you say, if it is one thing?
I think in a headline, the sticking point is that Hamas want the permanent end to the war. They want a guarantee from America that this war will come to an end, and it's not just a 60-day cessation of hostilities and a stopping of fighting and a temporary Israeli withdrawal, but a complete Israeli withdrawal from the territory and a complete end to the fighting. That's something that's not on paper right now. What Witkoff is working around right now is some kind of wording, a vague wording that can say something along the lines of discussions will be held towards a permanent ceasefire over those 60 days.
Didn't we have that before?
That's exactly the point. That's exactly what we had before. We had in January a 6-week ceasefire, which fell apart because Israel refused to move to phase 2, which was what it was called at the time of the deal, which included discussions to end the war. Israel decided that Hamas wasn't thoroughly destroyed, which is one of their war goals, and we want to return to the fighting. And that's why the ceasefire fell apart, because they didn't want to move forward to the next stage.
Can we talk about some of the pressures that are on Binyamin Netanyahu's plate? Because it is quite broad. I mean, pressure from the hostage families, the chief of his own Israeli Defense Forces wondering why this war is going on for so long. There's an issue with ultra-Orthodox Jews and conscription. He's got far-right ministers wanting the war to continue for much longer, and a corruption trial on top of all of that. I mean, if you were to pick from that buffet of things what you think is weighing on him most heavily and having an effect on this process, what would you say it is?
I can tell you what it isn't. It's not the hostages. Critics accuse Benjamin Netanyahu of actually not caring about the hostages. He's been accused not only by families of the 50 hostages still remaining in Gaza, but also by the Israeli public of repeatedly torpedoing potential deals with Hamas to free the hostages. He's also been accused of being one of the reasons why the hostages are released in stages, so that Israel has an opportunity to resume fighting should they see the need during the ceasefire. This kind of gives them a stage release and a stage opportunity to return to the fighting. So I think the issue of the hostages, he's often said, is secondary war goal to the complete elimination and destruction of Hamas, which he's put at the top. I think the biggest thing for Benjamin Netanyahu, and it always has been, is his political survival. Can he stay in power? Can he keep his government together, which, as you say, has many fighting elements in it? The national, religious and hardline settler movement in his party, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, don't want to see this deal. That being said, I think they would support it if they think it's temporary. Smotrich didn't pull out last time. Ben Gvir did, and he rejoined the coalition when fighting resumed. I think they'll be willing to go down the route of a temporary ceasefire, but their ultimate goal is to see the resettlement of Gaza by Jewish civilians and the expulsion of the Palestinian indigenous people who are living there at the moment. So he has to balance those elements of his government with the ultra-Orthodox, which you also mentioned, who don't want to be conscripted into the army. Historically, this sect of religious people don't serve in the army since 1948. There was kind of an unspoken agreement that in lieu of military service, there could be, I'm going to put a kind of conscription of sorts to religious studies. And that community believed that by praying for the peace for Israel, they are doing their job. They're serving the country in that way and protecting them through God. So the military is now saying we need those people. We're running short of numbers on the foot soldiers on the ground. Our reservists are exhausted after nearly 22 months of war. We need to start conscripting this sect of society. So actually, the ultra-Orthodox now kind of want the war to end so that they don't have to get conscripted. That would kind of absolve them of that problem. So he's got all these competing factors, but the hostage families in particular have accused Benjamin Netanyahu of not really caring about them.
We call upon Prime Minister Netanyahu. You promised us that you would bring all the hostages back. Now is the time to do so.
He's torpedoed several deals in the past that could have returned all the hostages all at once. And this current deal that's on the table, the hostage families are angered over it because they say that it's kind of like a Schindler's List of sorts by choosing the names that should be released in the deal and leaving others out and leaving others to languish in what we know are really dire conditions, being held underground, being tortured, complete lack of food, sunlight, water, basic hygiene for over 630 days. So I think that the hostage families are quite angry with Netanyahu on that front.
Bring them home now! Make the deal!
You said one of his driving forces is political survival, the corruption trial. How big a worry is that for him on that front, do you think?
This trial's been dragged out for years, and it gets more and more ridiculous as time goes on, and he kind of moves further and further away from these allegations of corruption, breach of trust, colluding with the media to get favorable coverage. And the further away he moves from the court date, then the less likely he is to be convicted.
Even Donald Trump's got involved in that.
Yeah, that was an unusual move. We've never seen an American president intervene in the domestic affairs in such a way to go out of his way to tweet and kind of protect Netanyahu. He wrote that it was a political witch hunt and that Donald Trump personally knows how that feels to be hunted down in that way. It was unusual to see that kind of interference, but it worked. Benjamin Netanyahu now doesn't have to testify in his corruption trial at the moment. That's being delayed probably until after the summer break when courts return.
We mentioned the suffering of the hostages who are held in Gaza. We also, of course, have the suffering of Palestinians living in Gaza as this war continues. Finally, in terms of all the pressures on the negotiating parties, how big do you think that plays, the growing chorus of disapproval from around the world at the state of what is happening in Gaza and the humanitarian response? Do you think that actually has much of an impact on the deals that could be done?
Israel has previously always had a kind of mantra of going to war, making sure that when they were at war, of having international legitimacy behind them and to know that it's a quote-unquote righteous war to go into. I think this is the first time Israel's really put itself out as a pariah and is being held to account by various international bodies, especially the UN and of course the ICC, the International Criminal Court of Justice, who accuse Israeli leaders of war crimes. International attention is certainly focused on the deadly situation that Gazan civilians are undergoing. Not only they're facing hunger, most of the population are homeless. The strip is in complete ruins. It looks like a moonscape. They have nowhere to run, no safe places. Israeli plans that are being floated, for example, cordoning off areas to be humanitarian-only zones. So far, those plans haven't worked, but the more recent ones are, international organizations are calling them war crimes, calling for the forced expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland. All of this has put the spotlight on Israel as a perpetrator of war crimes. And there is dissent among the Israeli public and among the Israeli military who say they don't want Israel to be an occupying force in Gaza. They don't want Gaza to start looking like the West Bank. But they're really not tabling any other solution as to what to do with the Gaza Strip. And the decimation of the Gaza Strip and the despair of the population, there just seems to be no solution for what's happening right now.
Gabrielle, we're discussing how peace might come to Gaza and Israel, volume 57,000 at this point. As you explained, these ceasefire talks are continuing with this US proposal that's on the table. We know this kind of thing has failed in the past. Are we in a different world now, or could the same pitfalls and issues actually make this ceasefire process end up like the last ones?
I think we are in a different world, but for sadly negative reasons and not for positive ones. You know, since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007, Israel has fought repeated wars with Hamas. I think 4 now, in an approach that was known as kind of mowing the grass, which meant chopping off the heads of Hamas leaders and trying to quieten the Gaza border. And I think that a similar policy is kind of still going on and being dragged out today. I think it would be wishful thinking to say that the current ceasefire deal, if and when it goes ahead, will lead to a permanent peace. There is many, many more steps and many, many more things that need to be agreed upon before that can be reached. We're more likely, history tells us, to see more of the same, which means a temporary ceasefire, temporary relief for Palestinians who are facing starvation, facing homelessness on an unimaginable scale. They'll have some relief. More aid will come in. There won't be fighting. And in the meantime, Israeli troops also are going to recover and regroup. But also Hamas can regroup in that time. Whoever restarts the war, I think that is where the arrows are pointing, to a restart of the war and a continued Israeli military takeover of the territory. They already hold some 80% of the territory. For Israel, that's a victory. It says that Hamas have been degraded to a very high degree. We've seen their leaders being killed. We've seen the masterminds of the October the 7th attack, all 3 of them who are wanted for war crimes by the ICJ, now eliminated. The current leader is lesser known. He's also known to be hardline, but he doesn't have the clout that previous Hamas leaders had. They've run out of money. They've run out of weaponry. Their backers, Iran, have also been decimated in the latest round with Israel. You know, they're in a much weaker position. But at the same time, they represent an ideology. They represent the violent resistance, the call to violent resistance against what they see as an Israeli occupation and Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people. I think that idea is harder to kill, and it can't only be done by military pressure alone. There needs to be investment in long-term education, civilian infrastructure, the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, all things that are on the table and have been touted by Arab countries, the Arab League, the Egyptian proposal. There are proposals on the table that can lead to a longer-term future for Gaza. But Israel has disavowed the idea of the Palestinian Authority taking over, which is the most likely and the most reasonable and the most sensible way to govern the Gaza Strip.
Because that's the issue, isn't it? If there's still the wide gulf between Hamas and Israel about a permanent end to the war, which is being debated over in these ceasefire proposals, then beyond that, there's an even wider gulf between them on what will happen to Gaza, who will run it, how will security be managed around it. Have we also seen a shift in what the likes of the US and what the leaders of some of those Arab countries, away from their civilians, think about that question as well?
The US has floated and then disavowed the idea of a full population transfer for the Gazans. Of course, you remember when Donald Trump tweeted that AI vision of Gaza, which showed a high-tech hub with Elon Musk eating a falafel. Of course, Elon Musk will definitely not be in the picture anymore.
Not quite, yeah.
But you know, there was this idea of having a Gazan Riviera. I think that was poo-pooed and widely condemned, not only by Arab countries, but by the whole world, saying, you know, this is ethnic cleansing, this is forcible expulsion of native people. You know, that that's something that is a war crime. Nonetheless, that idea was really espoused and adopted by Israel.
It's called free choice. If people want to stay, they can stay. But if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people a free choice. We're working with the United States very closely about finding countries that will seek to realize what they always say, that they want to give the Palestinians a better future.
And we've had great cooperation from surrounding Israel, surrounding countries, great cooperation from every single one of them. So something good will happen.
The defense minister just on Monday saying that he's drawn up a plan to corral 600,000 Palestinians into the south of the Strip and make it into a civilian-only zone where Palestinians will have to show their ID in order to go in and then won't be allowed out again. And Netanyahu has backed that idea in the past and said that he wants to lay siege to the north of the Strip. So that's Jabalia and Bet Hanun and other areas, as well as Gaza City, where the last remaining Hamas fighters, along with their weaponry, is thought to be holed up in the tunnels there. He said that the civilians all need to move south. So that's actually what has been happening practically on the ground since the breakdown of the last ceasefire since March and the intensification of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which has been going on for around 2 months now. Intense bombardment and no safe place for civilians to go.
What about the Arab leaders, your Egyptians and your Saudis? Have they changed in a similar fashion?
They held a meeting late last year, an Arab League meeting, and they all endorsed this Egyptian proposal, which was essentially to allow Egyptian and Jordanian security officers to train Palestinian and Gazan officers to maintain the security of the Gaza Strip, to enact some kind of transitional government, and it didn't explicitly say to see Hamas disarmed, but that would involve Hamas disarmament and some level of exile for Hamas leaders. That plan is unlikely to happen because Israel will not allow the Palestinian Authority to take control of the Gaza Strip. Israel doesn't want to see any kind of amalgamation of the Palestinian Authority with Gaza, and that means destroying a long-held policy for Israel, which was the separation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as well as residents of East Jerusalem. They've tried to divide and rule when it comes to Palestinians in different areas. The bottom line is that they don't want to see the creation of a Palestinian state, and something like that would be well on the way to seeing a unified Palestinian state in Gaza and in the West Bank, and that's going to be something that Benjamin Netanyahu will avoid till his dying day.
And what of public opinion across the Middle East in all of this? Because on each side, there are very deep-rooted feelings about what needs to change and how much we hate the other side.
Yeah, that's really true. And that really underlines much of the conflict, not only over the past few decades, but perhaps for the past few thousand years. As we touched on earlier, Israel has lost global legitimacy for this war. Any sympathy and understanding that they had from the horrors that were perpetrated on October the 7th have almost all been forgotten, particularly by the Arab world. You don't really meet many Israelis who visit Jordan, and you don't meet any Jordanians, I'm going to say, that visit Israel. And I would say the same with Egypt, similarly with Morocco. And I'm not talking about this is a generalization, so it's difficult to get into the details. And of course, there are Egyptian Jews and there are Moroccan Jews who visit their hometowns and where they came from and their heritage, and that's a very beautiful thing. But I think the majority of the populations don't have friendships, and that's something that needs to come from grassroots movements. And we're very, very far away from that, given the horror over the almost 2-year-old conflict in Gaza. The Palestinians are seen as a symbol of anti-imperialism, of a movement away from Western oppression, and the solidarity that the Arab world, the Muslim world in particular, feels for the Palestinians is very strong. And that doesn't mean that Israel can't make peace with the governments, but it will take a lot more to get the civilian populations on board.
We've long said, though, that Donald Trump is such a wild card in these matters and is somebody who wants a deal on all of these conflicts. Obviously, most of them have eluded him as much as he's sort of trumpeted his efforts. Do you think sheer force of personality might change things that have eluded other leaders in the past?
It's a good question. He's unpredictable. It's hard to know if he is the one to be able to make this deal. He will probably be able to oversee a temporary ceasefire. I just think the wider peace that he's after and the Nobel Peace Prize that Benjamin Netanyahu has kindly nominated him for is a little bit further away than he might dream of. Saudi Arabia was quite close to normalizing relations with Israel before October the 7th, 2023, without the recognition of a previously demanded Palestinian state. This point in time, Saudi in particular would need to see an end, permanent end, to the Gaza war. They've also added requests onto the United States, and they've said we want a civil nuclear program as well as certain trade deals. So I think Trump would have to give up a bit more to see that wider peace that he wants. That being said, I think it is worthy of note that the enemies that Israel previously saw in Lebanon and in Syria with Hezbollah and the Shia armed militia and the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the Alawi leader, has opened up new opportunities for Israel to, if we don't call it peace, then to make some kind of arrangement with their neighbors not to be at war anymore. And that would mainly involve discussions over areas that are in dispute. Since 1967, the Golan Heights in Syria and then the border with Lebanon, that line would need to be demarcated and marked. And I think the Lebanese government have moved on quite far away from Hezbollah. They've called for Hezbollah to disarm. Hezbollah have been severely weakened.
And as you say, the first chip before any of that has to fall into place is some kind of agreement which brings about a, quote, permanent end to the war. And that is something that we're not any closer to seeing agreement on.
Sadly not. We are closer. I mean, we heard Israeli and Hamas officials saying that the deal is 90% done. But the deal is a temporary relief. It's a 60-day deal. It's not a deal for what the future of Gaza looks like. And we heard from our team on the ground their reaction to this new Israeli plan to cordon off areas per civilian-only zones. And people are despairing there. They feel that they have no safe place to go. They have no international protection. Nobody's looking out for them. They are completely beholden to the whim of the Israeli military. And they have no homes. They have no food. They have no shelter. It's a situation which isn't going to be resolved overnight, and it's certainly not going to be resolved by the signing of a temporary ceasefire and piece of paper that says, let's stop fighting for a minute so we can both regroup and see our hostages and see our Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails freed. That doesn't solve the problem for the Palestinian people of who is going to rule the enclave if it's not the Israeli military and if it's not a full occupation of the Israeli military.
Gabrielle Weiniger, a correspondent based in Tel Aviv for The Times. You can read all of her reporting and lots of other reporting and analysis from the region over at thetimes.com if you have a subscription. That is it from us today. Today's producer was Shabnam Grewal, the executive producer was Taryn Siegel, and sound design and theme composition was by Mauro Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.